Hi, and welcome to What the Phalange, the podcast where we watch every episode of Friends, discuss it, deconstruct it, and fan over it, one episode at a time.
My name is Quinn, pronouns zir or they, them.
And my name is Emily, pronouns she and her.
This week, we're talking about Season 1, Episode 6, The One with the Butt. Aired October 27th, 1994. Written by Adam Chase and Ira Ungerleider. Hopefully I said that right. Directed by Arlene Sanford. This week, in researching new podcasts, Emily stumbled upon an awesome Harry Potter podcast entitled The Gayly Prophet.
Quoting directly from their website, The Gayly Prophet is the intersectional, queer Harry Potter podcast of your dreams. It's hosted by Jessie Blount, she, her, a queer woman of color, and Lark Malachi Gray, he, him, a queer disabled non-binary trans masked human. They go through every book, taking on a couple of chapters per episode.
In light of recent conversations emerging again around J.K. Rowling's openly transphobic rhetoric, this is an especially valuable podcast. Furthermore, we will link Dylan Marron's YouTube video entitled Every Single Word Spoken by a Person of Color in the entire Harry Potter film series, which highlights the extreme lack of diversity in the Harry Potter world.
I cannot wait to reread Harry Potter this summer with other queer and trans positive pals.
So, first of all, what are your feels about this episode?
My feels around this episode. There's just not necessarily a lot to unpack in this episode. I think this is a pretty neutral Friends episode in terms of problematic things.
I think it just brings up really interesting concepts. There's nothing really to target about individual people, and we can nitpick, I think, through certain aspects. But I think it's just an episode that brings up interesting concepts that are really interesting or fun to talk about in the lens that we are, taking on this podcast.
Yeah, for sure. I agree.
So, Emily, what are the three things that you wanted to talk about today? I think we have things that overlap.
Okay, I want to talk about Freud. But I want to talk a little bit about Freud and some things that I didn't know until we had a discussion about this.
Yeah.
The second thing I want to talk about is the representation of non-monogamy and polyamory and Chandler dating a beautiful, beautiful human who I wish I could date. And living with Monika would be an absolute nightmare. That's what I want to talk about.
Oh, interesting.
What do you want to talk about this episode?
Okay, so what I wanted to talk about is I also want to talk about the representation of polyamory and the fact that they brought it up. Mm-hmm. I want to talk about Freud as well because, we have a fun story to tell about Freud and our discussion about it when we were watching it. But then lastly, I actually want to talk about Yemen. Yeah, okay. Emily just gave me a really funny look. So they bring up, this is not the only time they're going to bring up Yemen in the series, and I want to talk about it.
All right, interesting. Let's do it. So going right away into the cold open.
Okay, question. Is this considered a cold open? What's the definition of a cold open?
Cold open is just the scene that happens before the credits.
Oh, no matter what?
No matter what.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
I thought about that too because I was like, is there a warm open? Because this feels
I didn't think that.
Okay, well, it feels like this would be a warm open because the next scene is right away, they're in the same place, they're doing the same thing. So it's
right.
That hasn't really happened yet.
Yeah, that's it. This is the first time where
there's a warm open.
There's a warm open where the first scene actually does apply to the whole rest of the plot, or it is the beginning of everything
of the story.
Story. And I find it really interesting that it starts off not in the cafe. First time they've done that, I think.
Really? Oh yeah.
Yeah, every time it's opened up and they've been in the cafe.
Yeah. I guess that makes sense.
So they're in a different spot, still not working.
They're never working.
And then we get a little taste of Joey's acting career, which is I just think it's just so great. And I love how it opens up and it's like Rachel is so excited. She so clearly has no idea what's about to hit her. The others are like vets at this, you know, like they like know what's about to happen. They're like, you have no idea. It's cute.
No, for sure. No, yeah, I think it's cute. And Rachel just wants to be so supportive in that moment. And Phoebe's like, I don't like that there's an exclamation point at the end of Freud. It's not just Freud, it's Freud.
It's a good line.
And it's so funny. So that gets us right away into what I want to talk about, which is when we were watching this episode. So we watch the episode the day before we record, and then we rewatch it right before we record again. But we were watching it yesterday, and there were two things that happened. One was that Quinn didn't notice something, and then one was that I didn't notice something.
But then when we put the two together,
our minds were blown.
It was like Morphin Time in Power Rangers, where they all like come together and they make the giant beast.
Nice, excellent.
So, okay, kind of, it started off where Emily was sort of like, I don't think there's something super great about this scene.
I was like, it's kind of transphobic. And then I was like, well, maybe it's not transphobic. And Quinn was like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, the scene ends, and I think this is just like very representative of how our brains work very differently. Emily was like, but the lyrics of the song, and I realized, I was like, I didn't listen to a single one of the lyrics. Like, I'm someone, I have auditory processing disorder, so I have a really hard time picking up lyrics in songs, like whether it's like on the radio or whatever. So usually I honestly just sometimes just don't even try. And so so to me, the joke was sort of like, well, Joey is a horrible singer. He's like singing this weird, ridiculous song. And also when you watch the extended version of the DVD, he's a horrible dancer. And like, to me, like that is the part that they're trying to drive home.
Right.
But then Emily sang the lyrics to me. Emily, do you want to sing the lyrics right now?
Your problem is quite clear. All you want is a dinkle. What you envy's a schwang. A thing through which you can tinkle. To play with or simply let hang. So I listened to this and I was like, I completely disconnected the idea that the play was called Freud, despite them actually talking about it and it being like on the programs that they're holding. I just like completely forgot that the play was called Freud, and I thought it was about a psychologist who was supporting a trans person who wants to transition.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is kind of weird. Like, are they making fun of trans people? I'm not really sure. And then Quinn was like,
I don't think that they're trying to make fun of trans folks. I think the butt of the joke is Freud and his methodologies and his psychoanalysis, and not to say that like there is so much
other transphobic stuff.
There's so many issues with Freud. There's so many transphobic issues in Friends. Yes, like, but this is more like talking about. The joke was Freud himself and his work, and
specifically penis envy.
Exactly, which then led us on into like having a conversation about how
weird this is.
Well, yeah, that too.
So for those who don't know, because I went into like a slew of research, because I don't know much about Freud. Like, I know what a Freudian slip is. I know like some basic elements of Freud, but I didn't know much. And then I spent like an hour and a half researching. And I'm going to give the definition of penis envy. So this is taken off of just when you type it into Google.
So this is like according to Freud, or like...
According to the regular internet, penis envy is defined
on... Should we give a warning? Like, is this like transphobic inherently?
I don't know. It's hard to say.
Okay.
Freud is just, yeah. So penis envy shows up as a definition from Oxford Languages when you type it into Google. Underneath it, it says psychoanalyst, a noun. And the definition is supposed envy of the male's possession of a penis, I'm putting male in quotation marks, postulated by Freud to account for some aspects of female behavior, notably the castration complex, but controversial among modern theorists, is what it says.
Can you translate that into...
Basically, the idea is that if you are a woman, according to Freud, so back before we were able to have conversations that, like, gender's not a binary, the idea that a woman was envious of a penis. It's like an anxiety that happens to a woman when she reaches puberty, in which she becomes anxious that she doesn't have a penis. Which is ridiculous. And the opposite is when men realize that their mother doesn't have a penis, is called the castration complex.
Yeah, interesting.
Which basically means that everyone's anxious unless there's a penis in the mix, which is ridiculous.
Yes, because everyone must need to want to be a cis-het man.
Oof.
That was sarcastic, by the way, if anyone doesn't pick up sarcasm. Yeah, Freud is interesting because he's, like, very much put on a pedestal in some fronts. He's considered the grandfather of psychoanalysis, and I think that there's a variety of beliefs around, like, I think there's a variety of camps, some that are super anti-Freud, because there's some very severely problematic things that he did. And then I think he was, like, part of the realm of, like, creating hysteria, like women having hysteria, which is just basically turned out to be, like, this really gaslighty form of psychotherapy. Oof. And like drugging women to be more complacent and domestic to their husbands. I think you actually see that highlighted in the TV series Mad Men.
I was going to say Murdoch Mysteries. I think they talk a little bit about that.
Interesting.
Hysteria. Because in Murdoch, if you watch Murdoch, I don't know. Have you ever watched Murdoch Mysteries?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I love Murdoch Mysteries. For those who don't know, Murdoch Mysteries is like kind of like a old-timey detective show. It's Canadian, and it's all about... It takes place in...
Toronto.
In Toronto, in, like, the turn of the century. So, the late 1800s to early 1900s. And it's, like, about a detective in a police force, and they highlight some, like, really problematic things that were happening at the turn of the century, and... There's some things they handle really, really well, and then, of course, there's other things they handle really, really poorly.
There are things that they, like, make one episode that is great to address it, but also then ignore it for the entire rest of the series.
You're talking about, like, indigenous rights? Yeah. They, like, have one great episode about indigenous rights and then, like, have no other indigenous people.
Don't talk about it ever again.
Despite, like, the ongoing... anyways, yes, totally. And they're like, they talk a lot about, like, women's rights, but obviously it's talking about women's rights, like, suffragists but, like, it's mostly white women, and have very poor representation of kind of Black struggles during that time period, et cetera, et cetera. But anyways, we're getting off track. All of that to say that they talk a little bit about, like, that hysteria concept. And so, yeah, so...
Go ahead. You interrupted me, is all.
Oh, okay. So you go.
I kind of forget what I was going on about, but essentially was sort of like he was the grandfather of psychoanalysis, and there's, like, the camp of people who really hate him and are like, everything that he did is wrong. There is the camp that is, like, kind of in between, and then there's the other camp who still really latch on to him in so many ways. But I think there's also a variance in camps because of the way that people have interpreted his work. There's a like very large spectrum, and like most things, I think some people kind of cherry pick what they want from his work in order to, like, justify their beliefs. Anyway. But yeah, I know that Freud's work can be very much used in a transphobic way, an anti-queer way. At the same time, he was the one that was, like, he's also kind of considered queer in an aspect of, like, he believed that everyone was bisexual to a degree, and, like, something like that, right? I don't know. What did you find?
If you would say that he identified as queer, but he believed that, like, again, quoting directly from Wikipedia, but he believed that all humans were bisexual, by which he primarily meant that everyone incorporates aspects of both sexes, quote unquote both, and that everyone is sexually attracted to both sexes. So his idea was that heterosexuality and homosexuality both developed from this original bisexual disposition. So, and again, I think that, like, there's some things that he was like, he spoke a lot about how homosexuality was, like, innate. It wasn't, like, which is, like, I think at the time, a lot of people were saying that, like, it was a choice. Well, people are still saying that now. But I think he was one of the first few people to put forth the idea that, like, actually, no, homosexuality is, like, is not something you decide you're going to be when you're whatever, 20 or whatever it is. So I think that that was something that was interesting that he put forth, but his views on queerness was, like, very much the idea of, like, man likes man, woman likes women, or bisexuality, but not within the conversation of, like, gender is not a binary, and, like, you know, so I think that's more where his problematic stuff comes through. It's the idea that, like, sex is, that just gets us more into the J.K. Rowling stuff. But yeah, like, I think he was speaking very much from, like, a binary perspective on both queerness, and I don't even know if transness was a thing that at all he spoke about.
I would be super curious if, I mean, I know that people spend entire, academic careers studying him. I'm very curious if any of our listeners, know anything else. And if you do, please, like, DM us on Instagram or send us an email. I'd really love to know, like, your perspective on it. And
you can even send us a message and be like, you're completely wrong. That's not at all what Freud thought. So just let us know.
Yeah. Neither of us have studied this. So
this is based on an hour and a half Google searching. So let us know.
Also, before we move forward, I want to give a shout out to the person who keeps downloading our podcast, who's in France.
Oh, wow.
Shout out to you. That's dope. I think there's also someone in Dublin.
Yeah.
And so I just want to, like, thank you for making us international, you know? And even if it's a VPN that you're using, kudos to that, because that's supposed to be, like, the safe way to go.
It makes me feel international, even if it is a VPN.
I know, exactly. So,
right. So thanks.
Thanks. DM us, say hi, you know?
Okay, so cold open ends. We move into the next scene, which they're still at the play. The play has just ended. There's people in straitjackets on stage, walking off stage. So some of the actors were wearing straitjackets. Yay, mental health and proper representation. Sarcasm again. So I want to talk about something that Chandler does, which is very ridiculous.
Yes!
And I want to know if you've ever done this before, because I just don't understand it. Okay, I think I'm talking about something else.
Yeah, I think I am thinking you're talking about something else. Go ahead, though.
Have you ever indicated someone, like, by saying 10 o'clock or, like, pointing the time? Like, there's someone good looking at not 8, 9, 10 o'clock. Like, who does that?
I feel like there's certain sects of people who do use, like, the clock language a lot more. Like,
it's weird.
I feel like at one point I tried incorporating this, but, like, 12 o'clock is determined by the person saying it, and so it just doesn't make sense.
You don't know
unless
what
you're standing
is.
right next to each other, facing the same direction. So
yeah, just say over there, and then someone will look around.
Yeah, or to the left. You know, like, I don't know.
To the left, to the left.
Everything you own in the box. Okay.
Woo. Okay.
Beyonce.
Yeah. I really love the way that they all kind of support Chandler in having this conversation with this woman, but also do it in, like, the most ridiculous way possible. And Phoebe wins, like, best line of the episode.
She has 2 great little speeches.
Oh, yeah, she's great this episode.
Yeah.
Phoebe is definitely such a supportive friend.
Yeah. And, like, general. But, like, supportive in, like, getting on your level. Because, like,
she meets you where you're at.
Yeah, it was so effective in her way of being like, you clearly have low self-esteem. Like, you see things in the way of of people in hierarchies based on their looks.
Yeah.
And therefore, I'm going to just play into that and be like, well, you know, you always see these really beautiful women with these really...
nothing guys.
It's like, you could be one of those guys. I would just be like, in that moment, that is like one of the best ways to like support that person, because like, I don't know, going the route of being like, no, you got this, Chandler, you look really great, like you don't have to look at it that way, like you're still a good catch, can just end up being like super patronizing. And I know that I've done that before with friends, and and realizing after, like, that just sounded patronizing. And, you know, I think Phoebe's approach was just, like, on point.
So great. It's also, like, I think that that's a thing that comes up a lot in the show, is, like, Chandler just being kind of, like, awkward and clunky. And this is, like, the second time, like, last episode they helped, you know, Phoebe helped Chandler break up with Janice. And now she's, like, supporting him in his weird, clunky way. And I like it. Yeah. And it's also like, Chandler is kind of a nothing guy. No, I'm kidding. He's not. He's definitely not. But he's just like, he's like kind of shitty in a lot of ways. And so I really like the idea of Phoebe kind of like giving him a jab, but also supporting him at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, he's definitely like a hot mess at this point in his life when it comes to like trying to date people. Like, he just doesn't.
Yeah, for sure.
Make sense.
Yeah. And then they're kind of encouraging him to go up and talk to this beautiful woman.
This part
is so weird.
Again, it's 90s dating etiquette. It's so different from right now. Like I think that so many people nowadays, instead of approaching them, would pull out their Tinder and be like, let's see if I swipe with this person. You know, like...
Interesting, yeah. It's hard because, like, personally, I think this is something that comes up a lot, like the idea of, like, approaching someone. And, like, women are approached all the time in public places, catcalling, like we talked about a couple episodes ago, or what, like there just tends to be this thing where like men will walk up to women and encroach their space and like basically feel like they are owed a conversation with this woman. But I don't necessarily think that Chandler was doing that.
Well, in the way that he was like, I wanted to say, would you like to have dinner with me sometime? Okay, thanks, bye.
Thank you, good night. And, like, walks away. Which, like, you know, if she didn't say anything, then, like, she had an out. He gave her an out, right? And she instead called him back, you know?
Yeah.
I don't think he, like, purposefully was trying to give her out. I think he was giving himself an out. But, yeah, no, I think that, like, it's so different the way in which you can approach someone now versus the 90s. Like...
Okay, let's talk about this for a second, okay? So, in the 90s, let's say, and before, really, because we're talking about, like, the real internet age of, like, and Tinder age, and any sort of online dating being normalized, like, this was the norm. This was how it happened. And also, there was, like, so many problematic things about that, right? Where it was very much, like, men, again, working in a binary, cis-het binary, you know, men could only approach women. That was usually the only real okay thing to do. And the reality is that, like, I remember being younger, not quite in the 90s, but, like, closer to the 90s, pre-Tinder age, when I was, like, a teenager, also maybe looked a little bit older than what I actually was age-wise, and having like guys approach me and like kind of ask me out, or like, but it can very often become like very berating, like like why won't you, like, you know, like, yeah. And there's so many issues with that. So it's like, it's almost like I've appreciated living in a world where it's less normalized to approach someone randomly.
But it's also, it's tough because, you know, I think about this a lot in the ways in which we socialize and the ways in which we can diversify our communities. And I think that, like, sometimes one of the best ways to diversify your community is not just being friends with your friends' friends. Talking to strangers and being okay with talking to strangers. And I think that, yeah, I don't know, like in terms of creating community and creating a caring society in which we don't just care about the people who we know or who are in our inner circle, but we actually care about everyone. I think that we need to kind of go out of our little bubbles sometimes and talk to strangers. But it's harder to do that when every single 98% of the time that you're approached by a man, it's because he wants to sleep with you.
Yeah. I mean, like,
worst.
It's not diversifying your friend group when it's like a direct, I want to sleep with you.
Yeah. Totally.
I mean, like, whatever.
But it's sometimes not direct, and that's the worst part when, like, you become friends with it. Anyways, we talked about that last episode.
Yeah.
Awful.
Okay, I also just want to take one note, or I wrote down, when Chandler was like, this woman makes the women that I dream about look like short, fat, bald men. Yeah. And I just want to point out
another dig at people's appearance. Again, the friends are very shallow. They really think that, like, you are only valuable and good if you are thin and beautiful, quote unquote beautiful.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about
how the fact that Estelle does not exist in the streaming version of this.
Yes. So at the end of this scene, you see that Joey has been given, like, a little card from a talent agency. And it's the Estelle Leonard Talent Agency. And then in the next scene, he actually goes to Estelle Leonard's talent agency office, and it's completely cut out of the Netflix version.
Yeah, like, we meet Estelle in this episode.
Yeah, and you don't meet her until season 2 in the Netflix.
Really?
I looked that up. You don't meet her until season 2 in Netflix. So, yeah, and so maybe we don't give too many things about Estelle because she's pretty great. And if we make it to season 2 with this podcast, I think that, like, you really need to see Estelle because in her greatness,
her natural habitat of her dingy, gross office in New York.
She's so gross. But she's so gross. She's not so gross. She's, like, it is kind of gross. She does this thing where she's, like, eating a sandwich and smoking a cigarette at the same time. And I was reading up on this, and this actress her name is June Gable. And I was reading up on fandom, and apparently she originally auditioned for the role, and the casting director was kind of like, you're kind of playing this part a little boring or plainly, as they said it. And so they told her, like, to leave and come back with, you know, something a bit better. And apparently she left, and she came back, and she was eating a sandwich and smoking a cigarette and stubbed the cigarette out in her sandwich for the audition. And so they included that in the, like, that scene. She actually brought that to the character, which is really
awesome. Cute. Okay, so our next scene, are we talking about
the coffee shop when they end up the magic eye book?
Yeah. Another scene that's completely, it's not even just doesn't exist, it's swapped out for a different scene.
Yeah, it's insane. Okay, so maybe you don't notice it when Chandler walks in to the coffee shop after his date. But Phoebe's doing, like, a palm reading on Monika.
Yeah.
And she's like, this line is for passion, and this line is just a line. But that's actually not in it. It's swapped for another scene.
On the DVD.
Yeah.
And that scene it starts off with them, like, zooming in the cafeteria, and they have one of those iconic 90s books where it's, like, a bunch of, like, weird designs that are repetitive.
Like
illusions that you're supposed to, like, look at and defocus your eyes, and then what's supposed to come forward is, like, some sort of hidden image.
Mm-hmm. And magic eye books, they're called.
Yeah. And of course Ross is there and he can't see it, and is like, I can't do it. And you know, everyone else can see the Eiffel Tower and the boat floating in front of it. And anyway, I just thought that was, like, seen on the DVD was just such a throwback. I was like, oh my God, I remember those.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I usually, like, when they do the Netflix versus the DVD version, they, like, have cut scenes to make them shorter,
or even just, like, lines, or even, like, just, like, the time that they pan on one person's reaction. Like, they're just condensing it.
But for this, they literally took out a scene and added the Phoebe doing palm reading scene, which is very weird. But anyways, so let's get into
the date.
Aurora.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
So Chandler goes on a date with her, and essentially the way that they recount it is that he finds out very late into this date where they're clearly like intensely flirting. There's something heated going
Hitting
on.
It off completely.
Yeah, that like she's in the middle of a story and she just like randomly throws in like, oh, and then we end up in Yemen, and which we will talk about later. But essentially he's like, who's we? And turns out that she has a husband, and the reason that she knows that her husband will likely be okay with her dating Chandler is because she already has another boyfriend.
Yeah. Which I do find is weird because, okay, so if we're talking about this from, let's talk about this like poly style versus like what people think poly is.
Yeah, no, exactly right. So it's like, I've been polyamorous. I think in a lot of ways I consider myself polyamorous. Have you been polyamorous?
I've been in poly relationships, yeah.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
And
poorly organized poly relationships, but more like open, non-monogamous relationships, I would say. Yeah.
And I feel like, I mean, we have existed in communities that are
very openly poly and
yeah, exactly. You know,
so what is polyamory?
So I want to first give the definition of like non-monogamy, which is much more easy.
It's very different, yeah.
So monogamy is when two people are only committed to just each other, have like a loving, committed, supportive relationship, usually only like sexual with each other.
And romantic with each
other.
Yeah.
When you step out into the realm of non-monogamous, there's a lot of different shapes and colors that can take. And so that just means essentially not that. And one of them, I mean, although like sometimes people, when they think poly, they think like the swinger community.
Right.
Which a lot of people in the swinger community will actually still consider themselves monogamous. And so like that's like a little bit of like a grayer area. But the swinging community is not considered necessarily polyamorous. I think there can be polyamorous people within the swinging community, but and usually swinging community is like monogamous couples who come together and have an agreement that like they can all sleep with each other or something.
Whereas poly is more along the lines of recognizing that all relationships, whether they're romantic or platonic or sexual, do not necessarily have hierarchies to them. And so, or there's various forms of that, but the idea that you can be in love with more than one person, you can have long-term committed relationships with more than one person, or even along the lines of maybe not long-term committed relationships, but being with other people or various people in various different types of relationships.
Yeah, and sometimes there's a bit of a distinguishment between an open relationship and a polyamorous relationship. An open relationship being that there's like two people who are in
like a primary relationship.
Primary relationship, or what would look like monogamy in many ways, except that they have the ability or the agreement that they can sleep with other people. And the parameters around that would be discussed and agreed upon, hopefully, between those two people. Whereas polyamory is usually more falls under the realm of like having long-term committed relationships with multiple people that is not necessarily just about having sex with someone else. And is, an especially like a useful type of relationship. I don't want to say useful sounds silly, like a weird way to describe it, but especially like for the ace community, let's say, where, if you do not have a sex drive at all and you fall in love, like two people fall in love and one person is ace and the other person isn't, a polyamorous relationship.
Ace meaning asexual.
Asexual, yeah. Polyamory is just the way to have a relationship because, and it's a very common thing within, especially the ace community.
What you learn more and more when you move away from like heteronormative monogamy, cis heteronormative monogamy, is that everything is a spectrum, whether it's gender, sexuality, relationships. Like there's just so much. And once you start opening those doors. You're like, wow, there's like so many ways to have a beautiful, loving, caring relationship that doesn't just need to be man, woman, Ross and Rachel.
Yeah. Yeah. Once you start picking apart the pieces and unpacking it all, you can kind of look at them all for what they are and then choose to include in your life what is most useful and healthiest for you and the people that you choose to have close to you in whatever form that is. I do want to make a like segue into the fact that like at the same time that polyamory is like a legitimate form of relationship, there are a very vast amount of people who have kind of like co-opted the idea of polyamory in a way to sort of use it as language to do whatever they want, have whatever types of relationships with people that they want without having to have any sort of accountability for their actions or how they make people feel. And you can see that to varying degrees, whether people are like legitimately trying to practice polyamory, like that is also a thing. And there's very, very vastly wide different ways of approaching polyamory. So there's no one size fits all, but also you can't make any assumptions when someone is like, I'm polyamorous. It's like, that is very specific to the definition of that, and how someone practices polyamory is very specific to them and the people around them and the people they're having relationships with. So no matter who you are, like trying to be like, polyamory is this, is actually not possible, because it's very much in a sense like a moving target depending on who you're talking to and with about so it's anyway.
Yeah, totally. So in the ways that like non-monogamy, and I think I would argue that this would be more of a non-monogamous relationship than a poly one, and the reason why I'm saying that is because I do find it odd that she doesn't necessarily mention to Chandler until like she just like assumes Chandler is like comfortable with dating someone who's married and with someone else. And I don't know how I feel with that. I feel like it's a little weird. Like,
yeah, and I think that that's also driven home, like, yeah, in the context of her, but also like, again, the show is like recreating these norms or like propagating these norms of like, men just want to sleep with people no matter who and what the terms, you know, like they'll have sex whenever. Yeah. And you see that even further driven home when like Chandler's saying like, oh, I get all the good stuff. Like, this is my fantasy come true. And then being like, Ross being asked if that's his fantasy, who, as you would define him as a character, that is not at all the case. He wants to be married to someone. And is like, yeah, it's my fantasy. And it's just, that's not true. It's not.
Right. Yeah.
Like, come on, Ross.
Yeah, no, and I definitely think that, like, in the ways, like, yeah, Ross is way too jealous to be in an open relationship.
Oh my God.
But I think more in the sense of, like, the way in which Aurora presents her open relationship with her husband and with her boyfriend, I feel it's very odd the way that she phrases it, because she says specifically, I feel as though Chandler should be fine dating her, like, you know, Chandler's like, oh, how do you think your husband would feel being here on this date with me? And she's like, yeah, he'll probably feel fine about it because he's already okay with Ethan, who is my boyfriend. And so I think it's weird that she says he'll probably be okay with it, because I feel as though if she was really in like an actual healthy, poly, non-monogamous relationship, she wouldn't be like, I feel as though he'll probably be okay with it, because she would have already had a conversation with her partner about him being okay or not okay with this new relationship she's entering into. So I think this is another way in which like polyamory, when they don't even use the word polyamory, but, you know, Ross mentions monogamy, so we could say non-monogamy. I think in the way that non-monogamy is portrayed here is very much through the lens of someone who's like, used to monogamy. So it feels as though non-monogamy was very much written by monogamous people.
Yeah, in this exactly.
In this context. Yeah. This idea that it's kind of like a free-for-all and it doesn't matter who I date and you should be fine with it because I'm fine with it. And whereas usually polyamory and non-monogamy requires like a lot of communication, a lot of consent, and like a lot of being on the same page. And I don't think they really present that here.
And if you enter into a dynamic that's not happening, it's probably a really big red flag, and get out is really my main advice.
Right.
Or just like that it's not healthy practices, and so be aware. I mean, everyone has their learning curve when they go into the realm of polyamory, but anyway, good enough topic. I do think what's really funny though in the portrayal here, that I think that most people who are non-monogamous of any type would agree is very accurate, is when she's like, everything is like based on like this schedule of like, no, I have to go see this person now. Oh no, I'm going to be late. And it's just like, I think that one of the main things that you ask anyone who does polyamory for a period of time will tell you is that like one of the most difficult things to navigate is time management. Because when you start having a lot of close people in your life like that, you have to have a really intense schedule, which is, I think is really funny to see in this episode.
Yeah, for sure.
I think one of the things that I want to point out, just along the time, like the line of Chandler and Aurora, is it Aurora? Aurora, is when he shows up at Monika's, and like then needs all the supplies to make Aurora breakfast, including a pan, and it just again is driving home this aspect that like these men who live next door to Monika are just like living off of like a woman having her life together, doing all like the labor of like having a whole set kitchen and like basically cooks and feeds for them. And they basically have just discovered another mom to take care of them next door. And they don't have to do anything for themselves. And then go over and use all of her stuff when they want to impress a girlfriend. And it's just, I don't know, I just find that scene very representative of the situation, but also like just so annoying and gross.
Yeah, and it's funny that you say that Monika is kind of like their mom, because like that literally happens in this episode, in which Ross calls Monika mom, which maybe we could use this to segue into that whole storyline, which is the Monika being a neat freak storyline. So the next episode after they're like, the next scene after Chandler's describing his date is in Monika's apartment, and Rachel has cleaned, and Monika kind of freaks out because Rachel moves the green ottoman. And he was like, I can't believe you tried to move the green ottoman. And it's this idea that Monika is a major neat freak. And Ross jokes that she's basically like her mom. I think it's so funny because I really relate to Monika in so many ways throughout this 10 series. Like, I feel like I am a Monika.
For anyone who can't see me right now, I am nodding with knowing eyes at Emily.
So I definitely feel as though I'm a Monika. I love to play by the rules. Considering like I have some, anti-capitalist, somewhat anarchist politics, it's very weird how much I love to play by the rules. But I definitely believe there's a quote in a later episode by Monika that's rules help us control the fun, which is like probably, if I had to pick any motto in my life, it would be that line, because I'm such a stickler for the rules. But the thing is that I would argue that I'm also really, really messy.
Well, that's because you're comparing yourself to your husband.
Yes, which is what I want to bring up, because I actually feel as though Ilyas, my partner, is like way more of a neat freak than I've ever been, but he's the total opposite when it comes to like stickler for the rules. So he's got this like super intense Monika neatness to him. Like literally while I was doing research about this podcast, I had a cup on a wooden desk and he comes in and he was like, you have a cup on the desk. And so I had to go get myself a coaster, which for the record, we keep coasters in our bedroom. Does anyone else keep coasters in your bedroom? Because I had to put my cup on a coaster.
Oh, wow.
But then, yeah. So that's pretty classic. So,
okay, Emily, are you a kook?
yes.
And a kook defined by, have you ever found out your magazines?
Wow. Yes.
Yes? Okay, 44% of people said yes on our Instagram polls. Have you ever waited for a notice before paying your phone bill?
I've definitely waited for a notice before a phone bill or for any bill.
You have?
Yeah.
You?
Yeah.
Wow, that was unexpected.
Well, okay.
Right.
What?
Is this before or after you got sober?
Okay, before I got sober, I definitely didn't pay any bills for several periods of time and paid the bank way too much interest on all of my credit cards. But now, I think that, like, the only reason why I ever pay my phone bill late is because I get the emails, but they kind of, like, they don't send me an email when my bill is due.
Right.
Who doesn't do that? They send me an email when my bill is late, but they don't send me an email when my bill is due.
Yeah.
But they don't accept, Virgin doesn't accept automatic payments either.
Oh.
So you have to, like, set your own reminder in your phone. What is this? The 90s?
50-50 on Instagram. I was surprised that it was, like, so perfectly half.
Mm-hmm.
And have you ever bought laundry detergent without the easy pour spout?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so this is the one where I was like, why? It was Monica's response for me. I was like, why would you do that? Why? Like, there's an easy pour spout on basically all of them now. I feel like you have to go out of your way.
But what do you define as an easy pour spout?
Like, if it's standing, it has like a little, like, that comes out, and then you pour it into your cup, and then there's like a space that when you put the cup back down on it, it can run back into the jar.
Oh.
Which I think is standard now. So maybe, I don't know.
Maybe before, well, maybe when the 90s existed, you couldn't buy
it was harder to get the
detergent with an easy pour spout.
Yeah, it's very weird. Anyway, 44% of people said yes, they have bought it without the easy pour spout.
Okay.
Have you ever put a drink... Oh, we just talked about this for you. Have you ever put a drink on a wooden surface without a coaster? So you said yes. 56% of people said yes.
I'm actually shocked that 44% of people have said that they've never put a drink on a wooden surface without a coaster. That's ridiculous. You've never done that? Lies.
Yeah, Shannon.
Lies. Shannon? Why Shannon?
Shannon was one of the people that stuck out to me as being like, no.
Wow, Shannon.
Have you ever not been able to sleep because you knew something was messy?
78% said no.
Yeah.
I put yes. Because I, like, not messy, but more in the sense of, like, having, like, an impending doom of to-do lists of cleaning I've been stressed about. And I've been like, I should just wake up and do the cleaning right now while I'm thinking about it.
Right, yeah.
But that's more from, like, procrastinating cleaning.
Yeah.
Which Monika would never procrastinate cleaning.
No, she wouldn't. She does it for fun. Okay, so 75% of people said that yes, they are a kook. Wow. Should we talk about the house coats?
Yeah, sure. We haven't seen all of them yet so far and what we're talking about.
Okay, where are we next now?
We're talking about how Joey has a new part and how all of his friends make butt jokes. So many butt jokes is what I wrote, which is really really cute.
Yeah, I thought they were really clever.
I like that they called this episode the one with the butt.
Yeah,
it was a good title. Sometimes I feel like the title of the episode doesn't properly describe what happens in the episode, and this one definitely doesn't. But I really like it anyways.
Yeah, it's definitely...
Because there's nothing really interesting particularly that happens in this episode. It just is kind of like a plot pusher episode. Like, you're learning more about how Monika's a neat freak. You're learning more about Joey's acting career. You're learning more that Chandler is terrible with relationships. But, like, you're not really, like, there's nothing defining about this episode.
It's just like an entertaining little look into their life.
Totally.
Bringing up... Well, it's a lot of what the... I mean, yeah, there is a plot over the 10 seasons, but at the same time, a large part of the series is really just, like, looking at the ridiculousness of, like, a day in the life of these kids trying to make it in the big city, you know?
Yeah, totally.
Also, okay, I'm going to admit this out loud. Please don't. judge me, but I don't really fully know who Alpachino is. Like, the name is really familiar.
What?
Can you, like, give me a, like, who, like, what is he, like, what does this actor do?
Okay, I said what, and
now you're Googling it.
Okay, but he's in The Godfather. I'm saying that before I look.
Okay, he is in The Godfather.
I'm saying that before I look. I'm saying that before I look, and now I'm going to look and confirm that information. See, you know what I do? I often get Al Pacino and Robert De Niro mixed up, which is, like, just goes to show you that I'm definitely, like, born in the mid-90s and not the 80s. But yeah, no, he is... Okay, so what is he known for? He is known for The Godfather. Yes, thank you. That's what I knew. Okay, he received his first Oscar nomination for The Godfather.
That's, like, a huge deal. Yeah. Like, being Al Pacino's butt.
Yeah, it is.
That's... Now I've, like, I would be very honored to be The Godfather's butt.
Yeah, it's great. But, yeah, so then we get into the scene of, like, the butt clenching scene, is what I like to call it.
This is so cute.
Yeah, and we see another robe here.
Yeah.
We also missed, okay, I wrote this note, and we've been talking for so long now, but I wrote this note about how, okay, so you said it was like, you're like, of course Chandler comes in and has nothing and is not prepared and, like, gets all this stuff from the girls' apartment, you know? But, like, I find it so cute how, like, Joey walks in and also, again, Joey's not prepared and he has to go borrow moisturizer from the girls' apartment. But, like, then Rachel wakes up and she's like, oh, who's making so much noise? And, like, there's just kind of this, like, early morning hangout. And, like, Rachel pours herself some orange juice. They're all in their robes. And it just makes me think of, like, collective living.
Yeah.
You know, the way that, like...
we're doing right now.
Yeah. But more in the sense of collective living with people who are all your age and people waking up and having different routines and going off to do their own thing, but having this kind of chosen family at home that is your community and isn't just your community outside. Like, I really like the idea that they mostly all live together. They have so much connection, all of them. And even though Ross and Phoebe don't live there anymore, they are there all the time. I just love this family community vibe.
It's very cute. Yeah.
Yeah. And then Joey clenches his butt too much. And so he gets fired. And again, we get that beautiful speech from
Phoebe.
From Phoebe at the end of this episode where she's like...
I don't think that was your shot. And I don't think you get one shot, which is like, oh, so good. And so then, and is like, one day, Emily, you're better at these.
One day someone is gonna, like, run up to their friends and be like, guess what, I'm going to be Joey Tribbiani's ass. Like, it's so cute.
It's so good. It's such a great line from Phoebe.
For sure. We also get a big guy moment from Ross, which is Ross is like, what's going on, big guy? And Chandler's like, big guy? I also think it's so cute when Phoebe delivers that line, she hugs Joey, or Joey hugs her, and then Ross and Chandler look at each other and they're like, aw, and they hug, and it's just like, it was such an unprecedented, perfect moment.
Yeah, where it's like, that's so sentimental. It's great.
Let's hug. Oh, but we missed the scene. We missed the scene where Aurora is seeing someone new.
Right.
And so Chandler's like, I can't do this anymore because you're dating too many people and I can't handle it and I need to be more monogamous with someone. Mm-hmm. Which is interesting because I find that this is such a funny concept in the sense that, like, so often there's the trope that, like, men really want to have relationships in which they can sleep with whoever they want and it's open and everything's fine, and men are always like, oh, women always want to commit, blah, blah, blah. Why do women want to commit? I just want to have sex, please. And then when men are presented with an opportunity to be in an open relationship that is, like, more on the woman's terms, men are, like, uncomfortable by it because they don't like the idea that the woman they're sleeping with is sleeping with other people or dating other people. And so really what they want is a non-monogamous relationship for them, but the woman has to be monogamous with them, which is
highlighted by Joey's comment at the beginning.
Yeah.
Where when I date someone, I need to know that I'm dating more people than she is. Yeah.
Which I think this is like, for example, I was dating a dude at one point in which like, when I told him I was poly, he was, like, really into the idea, and then he started getting uncomfortable with the fact that I was sleeping with other people, and or I was not necessarily sleeping, but, like, dating and seeing other people, flirting with other people, and he was too, and he liked that he was, but he didn't like the fact that I was. So it made him uncomfortable, but it was something that he was all for. It was, like, this kind of, like, it's a thing that happens where especially I find hetero men are like, I want to be able to not have to commit to any monogamous relationship, but I also want to be able to, like, have someone who is basically my mom.
Yeah. Ugh.
I want to date someone who's my mom. I want to sleep with my mom. I want my mom to clean up after me and cook for me.
You sound like Freud
and pay
now.
all my bills. Oh, God. Full circle. It is Freud. And then I don't want to actually have to have any responsibility in this relationship. But if this person who does all these things for me and it does all the emotional and actual domestic labor for me wants me to commit, then no. But if they want to sleep with other people, then also no. So the patriarchy is the conclusion.
Yep. I mean, there can be lots of problematic things within queer dynamics of polyamory, but
For sure.
it is very obvious, at least to me or to us, that when you take heteronormativism and put that in the context of polyamory, a lot of like the great things that can exist within polyamory is kind of twisted and turned into existing under the realm of a patriarchal lens. And a lot of the things like men not stepping up and doing emotional labor can really, like in healthy ways, can really just take a toll on the situation and end up, making it so that women are still just doing more of the work and men just get to like not feel like they are restricted in what they are allowed to do. Mm-hmm. Anyway.
Yeah, totally. And I think that I really like, because I find sometimes there's these kind of tropes in TV shows where at the end of this, the person leaves their other relationships and like settles down with the main character. And so I'm happy that Aurora doesn't leave her husband and doesn't leave her boyfriend to like settle down and be monogamous with Chandler. I'm glad that she like stays in her relationship that she knows works. It's healthy for her. She feels good about it. And Chandler, if he's not like willing to fit into that, she doesn't compromise her values and how she values relationships. Mm-hmm. So you had something to say about Yemen, and I have no idea what you wanted to say about Yemen.
Okay, so the reason I want to bring up Yemen is because it's not only once that it is brought up in the series of Friends, and this is the first time that we hear it mentioned. And I just feel like it would be a disservice to not like recognize what's actually happening in Yemen right now, which a lot of people don't actually know about. So there's been a civil war since 2015 that has been going on in Yemen, and it's gotten like especially bad. I mean, any situation with civil war is like pretty horrible. But it's gotten especially bad since COVID. And one of the main things that's been talked about is that there's actually probably going to be more people dying of starvation than dying from COVID in Yemen, despite the very large lack of access to healthcare that exists there right now. And there has been like things circulating around the idea of like the whole country actually being wiped out of existence because of the pandemic. If you can hear baby crying, that's our
Little niece.
little niece.
Little Nora. Shout out to Nora.
And I don't know, I kind of took our account. I went over to like one of these posts about what's happening in Yemen, like these informative posts, and I tagged the Friends account and all of the actors who were in it, and we're sort of like, the show currently makes like what, over $20 million a year still just on replays off of streaming networks. And there's a part of me, like there's like a lot of different organizations are asking for donations, and I kind of feel like, Friends has made a lot of money and a lot to spare, and they use Yemen multiple times as either a joke or a like point of reference in conversation in the series. And maybe we should just all kind of go over and tell friends to, maybe donate some money that way. So anyway, just thought I'd let everyone know what's going on over there.
Cool.
We will post in the show notes some articles on more details. Let's wrap it up today with the results. So instead of doing a general like outfit kind of show off or whatever, best outfit, we went with best house coat because there were just so many house coats in this episode.
It's true.
Very cute.
I'm very shocked by the results.
Yeah, I know. Me too. So technically, I believe Joey's at home robe won the meter, like which one is most liked. But then when it came to which one was the one that you were most likely want to wear, it was a tie between Joey on set, so the big poofy velvety one, and then the one that Chandler wears, which is like a waffly one.
Nice. Interesting. Yeah. No one picked Rachel. Yeah. I mean, not Rachel, Monika.
Yeah, for the one that you'd like to wear.
Which Monica's is like so lustrous.
Yeah. I've owned a few different house coats in my time, and I feel like I would have worn them a lot more if it was like Monica's, where it was more just like a something to throw on. Yeah. I feel like the big poofy ones are like really big and heavy, and
like I don't really wear house coats a lot. I had one and it was really nice to wear like after a bath, but I wouldn't really wear a house coat just like walking around the house.
I know.
But maybe I want to start. Maybe I'll get myself a house coat. Gotta live that pandemic life right.
Oh, that's very true. Okay, I think that wraps up everything.
Yeah.
Shout out to Kayla for some awesome feedback this week and some really lovely supportive words that I didn't even know how to respond to. But then also gave us some feedback that maybe the way that we spell out every single one of our social media outlets, letter by letter, is like maybe a little too long. So first of all, check out our show notes. All of our links will be there, including some link trees to different social media accounts and whatnot. Otherwise, you can follow us at WT Phalange on Instagram. We now have our Facebook up and running. Then you can follow us each individually. I'm at Kanien'kehá on Instagram.
And I'm at Emily B. Yoga on Instagram and Facebook. As always, let us know if there's things that you want to talk about, you want to see in next week's episode. We would love to hear from you.